Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to the North Fork of Long Island AVA in New York State, and we're looking at the Macari Vineyards 2021 Lifeforce Cabernet Franc. The story of Macari Vineyards begins in the mid-1960s when Joseph T Macari Sr. purchased a 500-acre former potato farm near the town of Mattituck on Long Island's North Fork. Being of Italian heritage, Joseph was introduced to wine at a fairly young age, and he began making wine with his grandfather back in the 30s and 40s at the family home in Corona, Queens, New York. Seeing the potential for high-quality viticulture and winemaking on Long Island, Joseph's son, Joseph T Macari Jr., made the decision to move to Long Island with his wife, Alexandra, and their 4 children back in 1995, and this is when they started to plant grapevines on the property. Today, there is the 3rd generation of the Macari family that has joined the family business, and Joseph M Macari is their vineyard manager, and Gabriella Macari is their director of operations. In the cellar, Byron Elmendorf is their winemaker, and he spent some time making wine in France, Italy, and California following his studies at UC Davis before eventually landing at Macari in 2020. Now, as is the case with many wineries on Long Island, Cabernet Franc is an important part of Macari's vineyards and wines. And of their 155 acres of grapevines, approximately 23 acres are planted with Cabernet Franc. That's around 9.3 hectares. And in terms of their approach to viticulture, what's important to note is one of their driving principles is promoting soil health. And this has been part of Macari's DNA from the very beginning. They have an on-site composting program, and they use this compost to add nutrients to the vineyards as necessary. So they're not using any synthetic fertilizers, they're not working with any herbicides either, and they also employ the use of compost teas and other biodynamic practices in the vineyard as needed. In terms of their wine range, Cabernet Franc makes its way into several of Macari's wines, including some red blends. They're also making a Pet Nat Rosé of 100% Cabernet Franc, and they're also making 2 single varietal red Cabernet Francs. Their Lifeforce Cabernet Franc, which we're looking at today, and then also their Estate Cabernet Franc. Now, it has been some time since I have featured a Cabernet Franc from Long Island, so I'm going to take a moment to provide a little bit of an overview of this region. So Long Island is essentially a low-lying peninsula that's located on the northeast coast of the United States. It stretches around 180 kilometers, that's about 115 miles, from Brooklyn, New York in the west, all the way out to just past the town of Montauk on the South Fork of Long Island. This region is surrounded by 3 bodies of water. We have the Atlantic Ocean to the south, the Long Island Sound to the north, and the Great Peconic Bay is what separates the North Fork of Long Island from the South Fork of Long Island. And these 3 bodies of water have a major influence on the growing environment here, which would be characterized as cool maritime. And the impact of these bodies of water can be felt all throughout the growing season. So in the wintertime, they help to temper the rather harsh wintertime conditions that can be experienced on the northeast coast of the US. During the summertime, they help to moderate the warmer temperatures. In the spring, they help to delay bud break, and this is good for helping to prevent or lessen the risk of frost or losses due to frost. And then into the fall, the heat that these bodies of water accumulate during the summertime, they retain that heat and then radiate that heat into the vineyards, and that helps to extend the growing season. So as a whole, Long Island's growing season would be characterized as longer, gradual, and a bit more gentle. And this is particularly good for longer season red varieties like Cabernet Franc. And in terms of New York State as a whole, about half of the state's Cabernet Franc vines are planted on Long Island. The other half are planted in the Finger Lakes. Now, in terms of the viticultural activity, the majority of the viticultural activity is focused on the eastern part of Long Island, and we find 3 AVAs. We have the Hamptons Long Island AVA, which is the oldest AVA, and that covers the South Fork. And then we have the North Fork of Long Island AVA, and then we have the Long Island AVA, and this covers the entire peninsula. Macari Vineyards is located in the North Fork of Long Island AVA. And there are some interesting features that make the growing environment here unique. So first and foremost, this region stretches around 30 miles, or about 45 kilometers or so from east to west, and the peninsula is rather narrow, only about 6 miles or about 10 kilometers at its widest point, and about 2 miles, which is about 3-ish kilometers at its narrowest point. And the elevation here is relatively low, about 6 to upwards to 20 meters above sea level. To the north, we have the Long Island Sound, and then to the south, we have the Great Macari Bay. And while the influence of the Atlantic Ocean is still quite evident here on the North Fork, it's actually a little bit less than what you would see on the South Fork. So the South Fork actually acts as a little bit of a buffer from some of that Atlantic influence. So the North Fork of Long Island is actually a little bit warmer than the South Fork, and the growing season is a little bit longer as well. And in terms of the growing season, the summertime temperatures can get a little bit warm, but the breezes off the Atlantic do help to cool those temperatures a little bit. And then into the fall, the temperatures decrease, or they cool rather gradually. So there's very little risk of frost into October and November. And this is good for allowing a much longer hang time, and this gives a nice gradual ripening of the sugars and the phenolics, which is, of course, as I said, very good for a variety like Cabernet Franc. And in terms of the North Fork as a whole, the growing season is about 233 days, which makes the North Fork of Long Island the AVA in New York State that has the longest growing season. Now, in terms of soils, the soils across Long Island are glacially derived soils, and we find a few different soil series here, but for the most part, we're dealing with sandy loams and silt loams, and they sit atop a subsoil that is sands and gravels. Across the board, regardless of soil series, we're dealing with very, very deep, well-draining soils that have low to moderate fertility and moderate water holding capacity. In terms of these soils, towards the center of Long Island, the soils will be a little bit heavier here, and then the soils get progressively lighter and sandier in texture as you move out towards the coasts. Now, looking at the Lifeforce Cabernet Franc a little bit more closely in terms of the fruit selection and vineyard parcels, this is coming from 1 acre of Cabernet Franc vines that were planted between 1995 and the early 2000s, and it's coming from 2 different blocks. And Byron says that each of these blocks contributes something unique to the finished wine. And what's amazing is these blocks are literally like less than 100 meters apart, which is kind of wild. So the G block, and that is the block that really defines the character of this wine. This G block has a slightly more southern exposure, and here we find 2 soil series. We have Riverhead Sandy Loam, which has a bit more of a gravelly texture, and then there's a small portion that also has a Sudbury Sandy Loam, and this is derived from crystalline rock. And then we have their NP4 block, and this is predominantly the Riverhead Sandy Loam, and this block faces a little bit more towards the north. Now, in terms of these 2 blocks, the G block, which makes up the majority of this wine, Byron said that it has, the fruit coming from this block has a really distinct floral perfume and a really beautiful florality to it, and that's kind of what defines the character of this wine. And then the other block, the NP4 block, that brings a little bit more of that classic Cabernet Franc varietal character. Now, in terms of the winemaking for this wine, the fruit for the wine was all hand harvested, and in 2021 it was all destemmed as well. And then in terms of the fermentation, it takes place in concrete egg. And there's 2 concrete eggs that are used based on the volume. And one is fermented with ambient yeast. The other one is fermented with a selected yeast. The total time on skins is about 18 days, and then aging also takes place in concrete egg for about 8 months on fine lees. And then for 2021, the production of this wine was around 2,000 bottles. So let's get into this wine. So the nose has a really lovely perfume to it, unsurprisingly. And it comes through for me as a very fresh, red fruit driven, kind of sweet, tart red fruits. There's a little bit of raspberry, touch of sour cherry. There's a little bit of a wild strawberry note, even a little bit of blueberry. And yeah, the nose is really fresh, very crystalline. There's a nice clarity to the nose. And there's a really lovely, delicate kind of earthier profile. It's coming through more herbal in nature. kind of soft, wispy herbs, as I say, like chervil, tarragon. There's a little bit of spiciness on the nose. And yeah, the nose is really dominated by this beautiful perfume, and there are some nice floral undertones here. I'm getting more pink flowers. There's a touch of violet here as well, but for me it's a little bit more pink flowers. Yeah, it just has a really, really pretty nose. It's delicate. It's got some nice intensity to it, and just that lovely, very pleasant perfume. On the palate, those same red fruits come through bang on as they did on the nose. There's a little bit more cranberry on the palate, which is really lovely. And then you're getting into, you get those floral notes on the palate. They come through actually a little bit more dried on the palate, like almost potpourri-like on the palate. A little bit of those herbs there too. And the palate is a little bit more spicy as well. Yeah, there's a nice spiciness to the palate, which is coming through for me. There's a little bit of like white and pink peppercorn. There's a touch of juniper here too. There's also a little bit of like a crushed rock thing kind of going on the palate too. The acidity is really bright, very energetic. This wine has a really dynamic kind of feel to it. Tannins are lovely. They're very soft, supple tannins in the mouth. They kind of have a silkiness in the mouth, and then they finish with this little bit of like a almost like fine linen type texture to them. Overall, the profile of this wine, it's really lovely. It's juicy, it's crunchy, it's got lots of energy to it. Yeah, it's I would say light to medium bodied in texture. It has this wonderful sucrosity, kind of like a sweetness to the middle palate, which is really, really lovely. It's just providing this lovely kind of jewel-like center to this wine. And all of those fruits are beautifully integrated with the spice, with the flowers. It's a very balanced wine, which I really like. In terms of the intensity and the concentration of this wine, I think it is bang on in balance with the acid as well as the tannin profile and the fruit, and everything is working really, really well together. Overall, it has this wonderful jovial kind of like joyful, jovial kind of profile to it. It's immensely drinkable. This is the sort of wine that I would recommend putting a little bit of a chill on. It would probably be superb on a table. Like I'm thinking classic roast chicken on on a Sunday night or something like that, or even I think this would be great with charcuterie as well. But overall, it just has this really beautiful, elegant, graceful profile that is also not too serious. It has that nice balance of, you sense that there is a lot of care and attention that went into the winemaking, but it doesn't distract from the ease and the drinkability and just that fun, companionable nature about this wine. And it's a really delicious example of Cabernet Franc from Long Island. And sadly, I have not been to Long Island yet. I know that's a travesty considering how close I am, but I do want to get there very soon and visit folks like Macari, because I think they're doing some excellent work with Cabernet Franc here and across the region. And it's an interesting region for Cabernet Franc. The conditions are a little bit more gentle. They do have that nice long growing season. So all in all, there's great potential for Cabernet Franc here on Long Island. It's definitely a region that I intend to explore with a little bit more detail going forward. Now, if you are familiar with the Cabernet Francs from Long Island and you have a favorite producer or perhaps a favorite wine, I do want to keep more of these wines on my radar, so let me know what that wine is, who that producer is in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.